Hi everyone, welcome to Upstart Live by PayU. PayU, as you all know, is one of the largest payment service providers in India. Upstart sessions are our way of connecting subject matter experts with founders and entrepreneurs. We talk about various topics which are required to successfully run a business. I'm Palak, the marketing intern at PayU, and I work in the events team. In today's session, we have with us Mr. Nikunj Agarwal, founder at the Invisible Paintbrush, taking us through the topic overall marketing strategies for SMBs. So, without any further delay, over to you, Nikunj. Thank you for being here with us today. I hope everybody can hear us, and if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat box and we'll be able to answer them and see them there.
Superb. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me again, Mansa, Palak, everyone at PayU. It's really exciting to be able to share this kind of information and really talk about small businesses in a way that give it the credibility and importance that they're owed. And of course, at the Invisible Paintbrush, that's kind of our everyday. We call ourselves a small agency for small business. And even though I'm not going to talk about IP today, I just want to let you know that this is something that isn't a casual thought exercise for me. This is something that is very much core to what we do and who we are. And so it comes from a place of sincerity and of experience, and not necessarily one from a place of truisms and academic knowledge. Right. And so what I'm going to try and share with you guys today, for whoever's listening, is really an overall approach to what a small marketing, what a small business can do in terms of marketing. And really, this is also how we think of marketing when we work with small businesses as an agency, right? And so these are not, as I said, just cliche answers, but they really come from a place of experimentation, previous experience, and just looking at what has worked for other people out there. Right now, at the same time, I'm not going to be making too many prescriptive answers. Someone recently told me, I think one of the most important things to know in marketing is that there's many different answers, and most of them aren't right or wrong. There's just different answers, and different answers suit different needs. And so it may very well be the case that things I'm going to recommend today don't apply to you, depending on your situation. But it also may be the case that you find that trying some of these things does help. And so please take everything I say with a grain of salt in that sense. But come with an open mind, because some of the things I think are quite exciting to think about, especially in the case of a small business, in as far as that they're different from larger traditional legacy businesses and brands. So what makes a small business small? Right. And that's an important question I think we have to ask ourselves. Now, there's a lot of answers to this, and everyone, has some kind of a vague answer that somewhere revolves around either revenue or team size, or, the marketing team size, or just the vision of the brand, or sometimes even basis the kind of product they sell, right? Or the very service they offer, the nature of the business itself. And so I've taken kind of three examples here just to try and shatter that notion a little bit, right? So WhatsApp is a brand I think we all know. Whether we love it or not is a secondary question, but it's definitely a brand we know, and one that I think most of us now use as a service, right? Now, WhatsApp has, if you take WhatsApp's value as a business and divide it by their team size, which is the number of employees they have one of the highest revenue per team member, right? And they were worth a few $1 billion with just a 55-member team a few years ago when they got acquired by Facebook, right? And so when Facebook acquired WhatsApp, they were a very small team of 55 people, and they got acquired for a few $1 billion, which meant that per employee, they had a value of something like a $350 million or something like that, right? Which is insane. And so the notion that, just having a small team makes you small is not necessarily true, because like with WhatsApp and, many other, especially tech service and tech product companies like Slack, WhatsApp, at some point Snapchat, a bunch of these kinds of services have been run with very lean and small teams. Uber historically is one of those brands that never wanted to have a large employee workforce, and they, I think, globally had something like 1,500 people up to a couple of years ago, right? And so it may not just be the fact that a team size makes you small, right? The second example I've taken is Tupperware, right? Another, I think, household name in India. And the reason I've taken this is because Tupperware is very interesting in that we're all quite aware of Tupperware. We've all, pardon the pun, we're all familiar with their products. We've all, made jokes about how our mothers yell at us when we lose Tupperware products. And we know the entire story, right? But Tupperware doesn't advertise, right? Tupperware doesn't run TV ads, doesn't run newspaper ads, barely does anything in the form of or in the way of marketing, right? Still massive, massive global brand, massive penetration across markets. And the only way they've done that is through their very business model, because I'm sure a lot of you know the way Tupperware works is through it basically, you can only purchase Tupperware products through a Tupperware affiliate, right? And so all of their sales happen as affiliate sales or as commission-based sales, and there aren't too many you can't go into a shop and buy Tupperware in that sense, right? And even if you can, then that is not happening as a retail relationship, but it's happening as an affiliate relationship. And just being able to do that and pull that off as a model has made Tupperware the kind of size and globally kind of present, and even within markets, just the kind of penetration it has is all a result of this, right? And so the idea that a marketing budget makes you small may not also be true, right? The third example I've taken is Pulse. Right now, of course, Pulse comes with the Pass brand, and it's a massive brand. But when they launched Pulse as a new product, it was not, right? It was very much a small product. It's a 1 rupee candy. And a lot of people think that the kind of product you sell makes you a small business, or what can you really do selling a 1 rupee candy? But the fact is that Pulse, within 8 months of launch, was making as much money as Coca-Cola does, right? And that's insane, right? That's insane. If you consider, I think it was like 300 crores or something like that in 8 months of launching a new product, and that's in a sense unheard of, right? In this space, and they really disrupted that market simply because of having a product that made so much sense and was so loved by people, right? They did not become successful by virtue of a celebrity or ads or any of those. Now, of course, they did a lot of creative things, and we'll talk about some of that. But really, what made Pulse is just the product, right? And it didn't need much else except having a fantastic product, right? And so, to me, small, especially in even in a business case, is not about team sizes. It's not about how much you spend on marketing. It's not about the kind of product you have, right? Instead, for me, small is an attitude, right? And what I mean to say by that is that even very large brands like Pulse, for example, that have the backing of a Pass, that have the money to spend, have been able to succeed thinking and operating like small brands and small businesses, right? For instance, a lot of massive brands have taken this approach of launching new products and services as individual startups, and eventually they take that startup back into the brand, right? A great local example of this in India, again, is Google Pay, right? Now, today, Google Pay has a Google logo on it, and we all of us know and love it as Google Pay. But when it started as Tez, right? And I don't know if you remember this, but it didn't have Google branding. Now, of course, it wasn't the fact that they hid it from, when you downloaded it from the Play Store, you knew it was a Google app, but it didn't have Google branding on it, right? It was just called Tez. And the idea for doing something like that was to treat it as its own kind of startup and see where the product goes, right? And a lot of Google products have been born this way, right? Gmail famously was born out of a kind of a internal team project that someone was running at Google, right? And so we've seen that, by treating it as an attitude, it doesn't really matter whether you have the money or not, whether you have the team size or not, whether your product is a massive one or not. I think all of those are challenges you can overcome. But really what differentiates a small brand from a larger brand or a larger business to me is the attitude, right? And so even a very, very big brand can behave like a small one. And on the flip side, maybe even a small brand can behave like a very big one, right? But if this is true, right, if what I'm saying is the case, that small is just an attitude, then why are we having this conversation in the first place, right? Then why does size even matter, and why is there such a thing as small and medium businesses? How can we even ask the question of why, of what should a small business do? Because here I am telling you that, look, small is an attitude, it's all in your head, it doesn't really matter. So then why are we having this conversation, right? We might as well end it here. The answer to that is, and before we kind of get to a direct, let's say, one line answer, but the idea behind asking this question is, I think it's important for us to first understand, just in a sense, what the impact of being a small business or a big business is from the perspective of marketing, right? Even if you think of it in terms of revenue and team size and budgets, what difference does it really make? Right? Even if it is an attitude, what difference is that attitude making, right? But before we can answer this question, let's understand, in a sense, how the marketing world works, right? Or really how most, I think, businesses scale, and how a lot of organizational structures work. Of course, we're in a situation where we're saying, look, we're just a little fish in a very big pond. How can we really compete with the big guys? Right now, we know, of course, the story goes, the big fish eats the little fish. Now, in this case, that's not to say that someone will come and acquire you, but just to say that the law of the ocean, in a sense, right, is that the big fish eats the small fish. And what that means is that there's a predator and there's a predatory, right? There's the prey and the predator. There's someone, in our case the small fish, who's kind of being hounded and has to survive, and there's this big fish which has to hunt so that it can survive, right? But the important thing for us to realize is that really this is relative, right? Because somebody's small fish is somebody else's big fish, and somebody's big fish is a bigger fish's small fish, right? And so this, I'm so sorry, this slide should have been an animation of an endless line of fish eating each other, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to work. If you can imagine that this line of fish is endless, right? It extends on both sides endlessly, and so to look at yourself in isolation as a small fish is quite irrelevant, because it doesn't really tell you anything. And it's only when we think of it in this kind of a relative manner that it really starts making sense, when you say that you're a small fish or a big fish, right? But the idea that I'm trying to kind of land at with this is that whether you are on one end of the spectrum or the other, the laws, in a sense, are the same, right? That on one hand, you're trying to hunt smaller fish, and at the same time, you're trying to run away from bigger fish, right? And it doesn't matter what size of fish you are. Everyone is doing that, right? Every fish has someone it's running away from, and it has someone that it's trying to eat, right? And that's the same with marketing, right? In the sense that all marketing is the same, right? Every fish is trying to do the same thing. And in a sense, every brand and every business is trying to do the same thing. But of course, it's different in terms of scale, right? So it's, a shark is also eating other fish, and the baby shark is also eating other fish. It's just that the size of fish they eat is different, right? And in that sense, all marketing is really the same, right? And what I mean to say by this is that the real core of what we think and define of as marketing, right, which is things like defining your brand, or building a brand story, or going to market, or running campaigns, or trying to build, let's say, social proof through influencers and celebrities, or trying to run offers and discounts to encourage sales, right? Trying to do festive discounts, right? Whatever examples you can think of that you think of as marketing, right? Whether that's a print ad, a TV ad, social media content, whatever else, everyone is doing the same things, right? There are only so many activities that brands can do, and so many ways that they can be done in, right? Now, of course, creatively, there's a lot of disruption happening. For instance, the cred ads are nice and funny, the one with Rahul Dravid, etc. And they were great. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to explain is that they're still just ads, right? They are still a TV campaign that are at its heart like four celebrity ads that are then followed up on digital with other content, and on social media there's content for it, and at some point I don't know, maybe they do push notifications, they do a bunch of things, right? But they all stem from the same idea. Now, it doesn't matter where on the spectrum of size your brand or business is, because your thinking is still going to be the same, right? What will differ is basically the scale of execution, right? What will differ is how much money you can spend on creating ads, right? Whether you can afford a TV ad at all or not, whether you can afford a celebrity or an influencer, right? Whether you even need to advertise, right? What if your business is a local grocery store? Does that need a TV ad? Probably not, right? But the objective, right, of trying to build awareness for your brand, trying to get credibility for your brand, trying to build social proof for your brand, trying to get more engagement with your brand, trying to get your customers to talk about even and share testimonials, all of these objectives remain true for businesses of all sizes, right? Even a grocery store wants its customers to have positive testimonials, and even Cred wants its customers to have positive testimonials, right? It's just the scale that is changing, right? And so if our objective is to build awareness for our brand, then the way we'll think about that is very similar for a Cred, for a grocery store, for whatever else, outside of the creative, like outside of, is it going to be a TV ad or is it going to be a WhatsApp message? That has nothing to do with the fact that what you're trying to achieve is that you want to build awareness, right? And in that sense, all marketing is the same, but also different because of its scale, right? Now, as a big brand that has a lot of money and has a lot of time and resources and power, they can do pretty much any of these and all of these things, right? They can experiment with TV ads also, they can run print ads also, they could get on the radio also, and they just have enough of a budget that it doesn't matter if one of those things doesn't work out, right? For example, they just don't have the same constraints that we might have as a smaller brand or a smaller business, or for any other reason, right? Whether we've decided, for instance, to treat ourselves as a startup and we said, look, we don't want to spend on marketing in year one, right? Whatever the restraints are, the fact is that there's going to be only two options for us at all our hurdles, all barriers, all our uh, forks in the road when it comes to making marketing decisions. As a small brand, you're always really just going to have these two options, right? Which I've tried to kind of capture with these M&Ms. On one side, you have what is, in a sense, the first option is just to stretch yourself thin, right? To do a small amount of everything, right? So you do a very small amount of social media, you do a small amount of WhatsApp, you do a small amount of investment on your website, you do a small amount of investment on, I don't know, getting videos made, whatever other objectives you deem relevant and necessary. But the idea is that you take whatever, let's say, 100 units of money or budget that you have, and you dedicate 10 units each to 10 different ideas, right? This is, of course, what even very, very large brands do. It's just that instead of starting with 100 units, they start with 100,000 units. And so they can dedicate that much more to each of these activities, right? But that's always option one, where you say, okay, I may not have as much money as the big guys, but I can still do all of these various things. I'll just do them in a smaller scale, right? Instead of hiring Rahul Dravid to be in my ad, I'll hire some local celebrity, maybe, right? Or maybe I won't even have a celebrity. Maybe I want to do a TV ad because I can't afford it, but then I'll spend that money on making a social media ad with the same idea, right? Or something like that. The idea is that I'll spread myself across all the available domains to me, and I'll kind of see what works out, right? The other option is that we'll kind of put all our eggs in one basket. We'll take all our money and focus on one thing to give us the best shot at success, right? And so we'll say, for example, look, the single most important thing that we need to be doing right now as a brand is to rehaul our website, right? And that means that we need to spend all 100 units of our marketing budget on rehauling this website, because that's simply how much money is going to take. And that means that we won't have money to do anything else until the website project is over. But at least we'll have a very good website, right? Because we will have spent enough money on it, or at least we will have spent as much money on it as we could. And I know that I keep saying money in this, but please understand that money in this example can really just be replaced by anything, right? Number of team members, time, effort, spends, the difficulty of execution, any of these things can be the barriers that you're looking at, right? So either you can execute 10 simple things, or you can execute one very difficult thing, right? Or you can have a team of 5 people working on 5 different ideas, or you can have a team of 5 people working on one idea, right? So regardless of what the constraint is, the options are always the same, right? Try and do a little bit of as much as you can, or focus all your effort on doing one thing to its best extent possible. Neither of these answers is right or wrong. They're just two different answers, right? And depending on your objectives and your priorities as a business at any given time, you will have to choose one or the other. And of course, there's also some spectrum between this, where you could say, okay, I'll kind of do something in the middle, right? So I won't do one thing and I won't do 10 things. I'll just do 2 things, right? Maybe. So you can find those kind of answers which may be unique to you. But basically at all points you're going to be making trade-offs, right? Trade-offs between one thing and another, right? A and B. And this is very important for us to keep in mind, because look, in marketing and maybe even in business in general, it's never a question of let's just do more, right? You will find that most businesses and most marketing teams will say that, hey, we are doing as much as we can, right? We cannot do more. And so the recommendation can never be just do more, right? Because doing more means you either need more time, or you need more money, or you need more staff, or you need more resources, right? And so the question is never about doing more. The question is about what trade-off should we make, right? Should we do slightly less of A and slightly more of B? Or should we only do A, or should we only do B? Because doing both is simply impossible, right? And so our recommendation cannot be, hey, do A, but also do B, because we understand that doing the second thing is going to make the first thing less efficient, right? And that's why we're constantly making these choices between spreading ourselves across many, many different things and kind of focusing on just one, right? Now, keeping this in mind, that kind of brings us to this question of, okay, so how then can we kind of use this to our advantage, or what are some ways that we can try and break out of this paradox of being a small agency, of being a small brand, and how can we really be a big fish without actually being a big fish, right? And again, I have 2 answers to this, and I'm going to kind of try and share those with you with examples, right? So the first way is that you just pretend. You pretend that you are much bigger than you are, and you fake it till you make it, right? And what does this mean in an actual sense, right? So I've taken the example of Pulse. Now, I could not find a relevant Pulse photograph with its wrappers lying around. So you'll have to excuse me and pretend that these Snickers wrappers are actually Pulse wrappers lying on the image, right? But I want to share with you a story. So when Pulse launched, they were a new product, and they were a new kind of product also, right? Because they had some salt in the middle, and that was not something that had been done a lot of in India. And so they didn't, obviously, when they started manufacturing the candy in the factory, they didn't manufacture it for a very, very large inventory amount, right? So if you can imagine, they probably manufactured 100 pieces of candy. If their average order would have been 1,000 for everything else, they might have manufactured 100, right? So, and now you can just multiply that by the scale. So for example, if Pass was making, I don't know, 1,000 units of Pass, they were maybe making 10 units of Pulse, right? When they first launched. And that's obviously, I mean, that makes sense, because you wouldn't want to invest too much money on an untested product, and in a new product you would want to wait for things to pick up before you really start investing money, right? But we also know from our earlier conversation, we know that within 8 months of Pulse launching, they were making as much money as Coke, right? So how did that happen? Now, of course, a large effort is just a large outcome was just from the fact that their product was so good and so disruptive, right? People just loved it. It was that unique and that new that people just loved it enough to be wanting it all the time and to kind of keep asking for it again and again, to a point where it really started going out of stock, right? But for that to happen, even for your product to go viral in a sense, you still have to get a few people to try it in the first place, right? You need that first initial critical mass of people that is going to fall in love with your product and then is going to basically take that message to the world and make it viral, right? Now, the question for us is, so how did Pulse do that, right? How do you take a candy that no one's heard of before, in a category no one has seen before, and get them to try it, uh, when there are already, keep in mind, in the candy, in the 1 rupee candy option, you're competing with hundreds of other options, right from like chewing gum and eclairs and mango bite and melody and whatnot, right? Like past, like Happy Dent and Boomer and every single 1 rupee candy out there, right? You're competing with that entire universe. So how do you get someone to try this, right? And Pulse did a very interesting thing, and this is where our story about rappers kind of becomes interesting. What Pulse did is they went around the city and they went to small pawn shops and small grocery stores and just small kind of roadside stall kind of shops, places where you would buy 1 rupee candies, right? And they took empty wrappers of their candy, right, of the Pulse, and they just threw it everywhere, right? So if you can imagine, they just took like 50 empty wrappers of Pulse and just kind of littered them around the cigarette selling shop, or like a grocery shop, or whatever small shops there are in like residential areas and stuff. And they just did this, and they kind of just did it, like, let's say, hypothetically, in the middle of the night, and then suddenly, in the next day when people are there, you're kind of seeing all these like wrappers thrown around everywhere, especially near these shops, right? Now, what that does is basically, if you can imagine, when you go to a shop like this to buy anything, and you're going to look down and you're going to see that there's like 40-50 of these Pulse empty wrappers lying around, the first question you're going to think of is like, hey, what is this thing that people are eating so much of, right? Like, why are there 50 of these wrappers over here? It must be something awesome, right? Otherwise, why are 50 people eating it? And that's what got you to try it, right? And this is something that Pulse actually did, and it really worked, right? It really worked to build social proof for the brand, because even though they were a very, very small new product with no brand recognition, with no advertising, with no marketing, right? They just pretended to be much bigger by throwing their wrappers around, right? Now, in jargonistic terms, you would call this building social proof, right? So the act of them throwing around wrappers served as social proof for other people to want to buy the candy, right? And if you can imagine, this was very cheap to do, because it takes almost nothing to throw empty wrappers. You're not even wasting your product, and it requires almost nothing more than that to execute as a plan. And of course, it's not something that you could scale to global levels, and once the secret is out, people kind of know about it. But it worked when it had to, right? And so this is a great example of how, even without having the access or the resources, you can simply pretend to be a much bigger brand than you are. And I'm not going to go into how you could do that exactly, but hopefully the Pulse story serves as inspiration, right? The second idea is that instead of trying to become a bigger fish, you focus on finding a smaller pond, right? And a small fish in a small pond is a big fish, right? Because your pond is small. And so you basically redefine the game, right? You don't compete with the big guys in on their terms. You find your own, let's say in this case, a pond, but what that means in marketing terms is, let's say you find your own niche, or you find an untapped channel, or you find an untapped audience, or you're able to build access in a place that other people can't. So you basically find some barrier that makes you more viable than whoever your competition is, right? And I've taken again a kind of local example of this. This is actually a chemist store in Bombay, very close to where I used to live. And this is a shop that I used to use all the time. Right now, why was that? Right, it was simply because they were the only medical store in my area that offered free home delivery, right? And that was not something that I could get anywhere else, right? The convenience of being able to call up a phone number in the middle of the night and say, send me so and so medicines right now, is just a unbeatable experience. Right now, it doesn't cost the shop too much. I mean, it's obviously, it costs them money to run a delivery service, but it doesn't cost as much as creating a TV ad, right? Because they don't need a TV ad. All they need is to win in that local area, right? In Andheri West, in this case, all this shop needed was to find a way to make itself more valuable to me as a consumer than whatever other shops were around me, right? And and this, I think, is a great example of how sometimes you don't even need to build a brand. You don't need to build this larger story. All you really need to do is find that one thing that differentiates you, right? That makes your uh, service or product or business or brand better than whoever else is out there for these. Right now, for instance, Health and More is not trying to compete at a national level, right? It's not trying to compete with Practo and with 1mg and whatever other health apps there are out there, right? It's competing with an entirely different market, right? The kind of people who like to order medicines from a shop are not the kind of people who are going to suddenly start buying medicines online for a few more years, right? And that's okay. Health and More is okay with that. They are happy to just serve that audience because that is the scale they want to be at, right? They don't have the ambition of becoming the next unicorn brand of the country and things like that. And so uh, sometimes, depending on your scale and your vision, it's enough to just find a single differentiator that makes your brand more valuable than others, right? And another great example of this is my own agency, right? The Invisible Paintbrush. Uh, for all practical purposes, not just us, but every agency in the world is just a collection of marketing individuals, right? We don't sell, no agency in the world sells proprietary information. They don't sell proprietary technology. They don't have patents. They don't have products, right? They are all offering, in a sense, the same service, right? So how do you differentiate one agency from another? It's very, very hard to do. For us, it was just about saying that we'll differentiate basis our audience, right? Not basis us, but basis our consumers. And so we said we are the agency for small businesses, right? Every other business can go to other agencies, but if you're a small business, come to us, right? And that could be the same. For example, I don't know, maybe Health and More focuses only on diabetes, right? They say everything for diabetes, come to us. You can go anywhere else for whatever else you want, right? And maybe that's enough for someone whose only problem in life is that they have diabetic requirements, right? From a shop. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that there's many creative ways for you to differentiate yourself, and it doesn't always have to be an actual service that you are offering differently, right? It could just be, for example, in the case of food, you guys might have noticed, for those of you who order a lot of food from food apps like Zomato and Swiggy and things like that, sometimes when a new restaurant launches, they send you a handwritten note. Right now, it doesn't cost you anything to offer a handwritten note in your food delivery, right, as a brand. But that single act makes people love the brand so much that then they'll want to order from you again, right? And it's these kind of things that I think are what I mean by become a small fish in a small pond, right? Don't try to compete with the big guys in their own game, right? Redefine the game, find a unique audience, or find a unique channel, find a unique uh, way of positioning yourself, or find maybe a unique service that you can offer, right? Like free home delivery in this case. I'll give you another very, very quick example of this. There's we have a My mom has a CA, and I have a different CA now that I have to run the business and stuff. And I keep trying to convince my mom that she should hire my CA, right? Because I think my CA is better than her CA. But she doesn't listen, right? And I argue with her and I tell her, look, my CA is, he's more modern, he'll update you more, he's cheaper, XYZ. I can give whatever reasons, right? But that's not her problem. Her problem is that my CA doesn't speak Bengali, right? And she says that I don't care how amazing your CA is, I can't deal with someone who doesn't speak Bengali, right? And so just speaking Bengali can be your differentiator, right? In some cases, as is the case for my mom's CA, right? He's her CA simply because he speaks Bengali, and no non-Bengali speaking individual could ever be her CA because she wants to communicate with them in Bengali, right? And again, costs you nothing, right? It costs you nothing to be a Bengali speaking CA in that sense. And so there are many creative ideas, I think, that let you pretend to be different from other brands, right? And so the last kind of question then that kind of brings us to is, okay, so what are those 8-10 domains that we can focus on, right? And I've kind of taken the last analogy for the day, I promise, the analogy of a marketing tree. Right now, why I've kind of used a tree is just to say that everyone is climbing the same marketing tree. It just that depending on how much money and resources you have, different brands can only climb up to different heights on this tree. And as you get higher and higher up the tree, it becomes more and more dangerous, in the sense that it becomes more and more expensive, and it becomes harder and harder for small businesses to do those things, right? And so before we kind of talk about what the specifics, what we should do and what we shouldn't do, we could just roughly understand what all goes into the marketing tree, right? And so right at the top, and this is easier sometimes to do top down rather than bottom up, right at the top are the most expensive marketing things you can think of, right? Like getting a celebrity ambassador, which is super expensive, or for instance creating an entirely new product, or for instance doing a TV commercial, or I don't know, sponsoring the IPL, big media partnerships, print ad partnerships, billboard advertising. All of these would kind of sit somewhere at the top of this, right? Using crazy like technology and doing augmented reality stuff, like all of this is super expensive, very hard to do. Now, of course, it makes sense, let's say, for a massive brand to hire let's say Byju's, right? It makes sense for Byju's to hire Shah Rukh Khan because their scale of operations is that large, right? But if you are only serving 100 customers, it doesn't make sense for you to hire Shah Rukh Khan. Whether you can afford him or not is a second question, right? But it just doesn't make sense. And so it's not that these things are per unit expensive. Per unit, it might still work out for the brand, because if it didn't, then there would be no celebrity advertising, right? So that means even celebrity advertising for a very big brand is affordable because the scale is that large, right? And so this is much more about scale than it is about per unit cost. But in any case, because the minimum cost of doing such a thing, like working with a celebrity, putting up an ad on TV, partnering with an event, publishing outdoor ads, because the minimum cost of all of these things is so high, it's just not possible for smaller brands and businesses to do a lot of these things, right? As you get lower into the tree, that's where then you have things like digital, right? And digital is a heavy word that comprises many things. But when I say digital, you could think of the average understanding of what digital roughly constitutes, which is largely social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. YouTube as content, video content, let's say search or SEO, right, a website. All of this is what people think of as digital. And then, on the, if you were to extend that definition a little bit more, you would include things like paid ads, or the, search advertising, or SEM. And all of this kind of can be clubbed as, this idea of digital. The benefit with digital is that it doesn't have a minimum cost, right? You can advertise on Facebook for 80 rupees plus GST every day, as the minimum, and that's very, very affordable, right? 80 into a month is 2,400 rupees plus GST, right? So for just 2,400 rupees plus GST, you could advertise on Facebook, right? But there is no way for you to advertise on, let's say, TV for 2,400 rupees a day, right? Even if it was literally just about getting 1 second on a TV channel, you would not be able to. And that's the great thing about digital. One, that the minimum cost is very low. The second, that the scale is up to your choosing. And the third, that you don't have to spread yourself too thin, right? You can use digital to kind of focus on very specific audiences, on very specific targeting, on very specific messaging, right? And that's why digital is kind of great, right? And then below that, even closer to the bottom of the tree, you have, what are not even really marketing initiatives, but just just things that you need to have as a precondition to being able to do things like digital marketing, right? So that means, for instance, having your brand set up, right? Just having a name, a logo, a website, right? Having your social presence in place, right? Figuring out what your messaging is, knowing who your audience is, right? And depending on what kind of business you are, this could constitute different things also. Like if you're a grocery store or a local business or any kind of local service provider, then it's very important for you to be discoverable on things like Just Dial and Google, and classified ads, and websites that kind of serve classifieds, and people who share these kind of yellow page listings, almost like the modern version of the yellow pages, right? Like Just Dial. Or you might decide to become part of an aggregator. Let's say if you're running a restaurant, one of the things you would consider is, should I partner with a brand like Swiggy or Zomato, right? Should I use their services? And if you do, then that automatically comes with a lot of its own marketing, right? Because then you don't have to market it. Zomato and Swiggy will market your restaurant for you. So depending on your kind of service or your product, there's going to be things at the bottom of the tree that are kind of unique to you and to your business, but they're just kind of must-haves, right? They're the most obvious things you need to do. Like in the case of, again, a local business, I would say having visiting cards is pretty important, because for things like local businesses, people do actually use visiting cards, right? People do actually put up a visiting card of a grocery store on their fridge and then call that store whenever they need to make a home delivery order. Now, yes, it's true that many people are also moving to big basket, but there's always going to be a number of people who just prefers calling someone up on the phone and placing their order. And that, I guarantee you, will become a differentiator for a brand in 10 years, right? In 10 years, where everything has become about online ordering, brands like Amazon and Big Basket will start offering a service where they'll say, instead of ordering online, you can call us up and we'll give you someone to help you with your shopping, right? You can just tell this guy what you need and he'll make your cart for you. And that sounds like a believable thing, right? It doesn't sound like a crazy idea. And so there'll always be this requirement, right, of just being able to be accessible to your audience, right? But the last thing that I think, and the kind of, the even if you've disagreed with everything I've said so far, or you haven't been paying attention, these last couple of things that I'm going to say are hopefully things that you can almost apply from tomorrow, right? Like the practical output of everything that we have been talking about, in a sense. And that is what I'm calling the low hanging fruit of this tree, right? So I'm saying, as we said, look, the top canopy is hard for us to get to, but there's a lot of value in the bottom. So let's focus on those things and do them right. Now, whether you decide to focus on, one large M&M at one time and do only one of these things at one time, or whether you choose to spread yourself thin and focus on doing everything at the same time, that's a call you're going to have to make, right? Depending on the the status of your business, what you're doing so far, what results you're seeing, what uh, access you have in terms of team and money and resources and knowledge, various such factors, right? And so you would consider all of this to decide which of the two approaches you want. But in either case, I think the 4 or 5 things that I think any small business can focus on, and really any business or brand in the world should focus on, are these 5 things. And keep in mind that as you go from bottom to top, it becomes harder and more expensive, right? So let's start right at the bottom, which is discoverability. Right now, what do I mean by discoverability? Literally just be discoverable, right? Which means, for example, if I am trying to find your service or your business as a customer, you should be discoverable, right? This is not to say that you need to focus on SEO, or you need to focus on becoming famous, right? Or you need to be having a lot of brand recall. None of that, right? You just need to be discoverable, right? So for example, if you Google the Invisible Paintbrush marketing agency, at least in that situation, my website should show up, right? It doesn't matter if we don't show up when you Google best marketing agency in India and our name is not there. That's fine, right? That's not discoverability. But if you search for Invisible Paintbrush marketing agency, and even then if we don't show up, then there's a problem, right? Because it means we are not discoverable. So depending on the kind of business you are, you'll have to make sure that at least people who do want to buy from you, who do want to talk to you, who do want to get in touch with you, have a way of doing so, right? So for example, if you're a grocery store, it's important for your number or your address to be visible. If you are a local service provider, it's important for the same things, right? Your local address, your number. And a great answer to this is things like Just Dial, or Google has something called Google My Business, right? Which is the way that Google creates those local business information cards that you see. I don't know if you ever Googled a local business, like Google something like, whatever the name of your grocery store is, like Health and More Shop, and you'll see a little card that pops up on Google that has the name, the address, all of that, right? The phone number, the timings. And that's very important for any local business to have. And it's completely free and it takes like 10 minutes to set it up, right? So you might as well do that. If you're, for example, an online service provider, which means you don't have a physical product, but you offer your services through some online delivery, or through, let's say, you're an online consultant, or you're a therapist who offers online sessions, etc., right? Then in that case, you would probably want a website, right? You would, or maybe you would want at least, let's say, a LinkedIn page, or you might need at least just a landing page that you can send to people when they want to talk to you. Right now, again, you don't have to focus on SEO. It doesn't have to be beautiful, it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to work, right? It just has to be that if I try to find your number, I should be able to. That's it, right? That's what discoverability is about. It is the easiest thing that you could do as a business, right? The second is social proof, which is to let people know about other customers and other clients that you have and work with, because that gives more confidence to anyone, right? So for example, if I see that my neighbor uses XYZ shop, then I am likely to also use XYZ shop, right? Or if I see, going back to our example, many candy wrappers lying around in a shop, then I'm going to assume that that candy is really good and I'm going to try it, right? Which is what happened with Pulse. So how do you build social proof? Usually in the form of testimonials, or a rating. So for example, on Swiggy, when a restaurant has a rating, that rating is social proof, right? Reviews are social proof. Your Google rating is social proof. On Facebook, your page can have a review and a rating. That is a social proof. You could have testimonials from clients on your website. That is social proof. You could talk about other brands you work with, like all agencies, for example, have this one slide on their website that shows all the other brands they work with. That is social proof, right? Getting featured in the news. All of these could be forms of social proof. depending on the kind of business you are and the nature of your products and services, you'll have to decide what social proof would look like for you. But there will be usually some way to build it, right? So for example, if you were a local service, your social proof would largely have to be maybe word of mouth, but it could also be through, for example, just testimonials, right? Like we have, I don't know how many of you live in an apartment building. For example, I live in an apartment building, and so we have this one security thingy called My Gate, right, which is like a visitor management app. So if anytime someone wants to visit our house, we get a notification on this app with their information saying should we allow them or should we not. Now, on this app, you can give reviews and ratings to service providers, right? So like if an electrician comes to my house and does some work, when he leaves, this MyGate app will ask me to give him a rating, right? And then other people in my apartment can see that rating and they can decide if they want to use the same electrician later on. And so if you are someone who provides local services, you should think about getting your name listed on these kind of things, right? Like MyGate and whatever other kind of apps there are. If you've got these two things out of the way, then for you to be able to do anything else, you would have to focus on getting a brand, right? What that means is that you would just need, I mean, you don't have to like spend too much money on it in that sense. You don't need to hire an agency to do it for you. You can just, I mean, you just need to have an understanding of what does your brand stand for beyond just the product and services, right? And that would be answering questions like, who's my audience? Why am I better than my competition? What is the unique differentiators about me, right? What is it that I should talk about, right? Should I talk about my price? Should I talk about my product? Should I talk about the lifestyle? Should I talk about social proof? What should I talk about, right? Like if you've noticed, Coca-Cola doesn't talk about Coke, it talks about happiness, right? McDonald's talks about love for food, right? It doesn't, McDonald's never tells you like, oh, look, in our burger, there is this and that and this many calories and these many ingredients. They don't do any of that, right? They just say McDonald's is awesome, you will love it. And so you have to decide what the brand story is, because after a point, that's what will help you grow, right? After a point, it's not about the product and services, because let's say, at least in the case of, let's say, things like a local grocery store, almost all grocery stores are the same, right? It becomes usually about then things like trust, your relationship with the store, whether they do delivery or not, those kinds of things. And all of these are things that would constitute your brand, right? That, what do you stand for? Are you, can you promise to be the most effective grocery solution in your area, right? Or can you make a promise that says, you can trust us, it'll never go wrong with us, we are trans, or can you say, we'll give uh, the, like, you can order on WhatsApp from us, for example. Is that something that you want to do, right? And then you say, okay, our brand is about accessibility, right? And whatever that answer is, the point is you'd have to find some answer to that, which then is what you will promote, right? And that becomes the next part, which is that when you've got the brand story, then you have to tell people about it, right? And so promotion is just a big word that I'm using to refer to the fact of having to communicate the brand idea to people, right? How you communicate it could be a million different ways, right? You could choose to run ads, you could choose to send out pamphlets, you could print visiting cards, you could I don't know, sponsor a YouTube video, you could get a billboard, you could put up a notice poster in an apartment building, you could do 100 different things, right? But the idea with promotion is just to communicate the brand, right? Communicate what is good about you to the people that might want to buy from you. And the last on the tree after that is investing in building content, right? Now, content may not be relevant for some brands and businesses, but if your brand is one where you do have either you're focusing on a brand story, or you're trying to build a, I don't know, a very engagement, like an engaged relationship with your audience, then content is a great way to do that. What do I mean by content? It basically is, again, it's just a big word I'm using to refer to marketing that does not talk about your product or your service, right? So for example, Coke talks about happiness, right? Now most times they'll make an ad that shows you a bottle of Coke and someone drinking it, and that person is happy, and then they'll say Coke equal to happiness, right? But sometimes Coke will just do a completely different thing, right? Like they had that song, right? They made some song with happiness, right, which became like, it just became an anthem for happiness, and that does not have the product, it doesn't have the word Coke in it, it has nothing to do with Coke, it's just a song about happiness, right? And that is an example of content marketing, right? It's marketing, it still creates recall for your brand, it still creates a messaging for your brand, it still creates a relationship between the brand and the audience, but it is not necessarily talking about your product or your service or your price or any of those things, right? It's just content. And that's really, to me, the low hanging fruit of the marketing tree, in as far as it could be, generically applied to all the different kinds of businesses that are out there. But as I'd said right in the start, consider everything I've said with a grain of salt, and be careful about how you apply it to your own perspective, to your own situation, because going back to, and the first thing I said and the last thing I'll say is that in marketing, and in really in most of these kind of fields, there aren't necessarily a right answer and a wrong answer. There's just many different answers, and they are just different, right? They are not right nor wrong. So choose what you think is best for you. But hopefully this past hour has served as a little bit of, I don't know, just inspiration. And if you if you found no other value in it, then hopefully just it's just been a little bit of a storytelling session. But thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that this has been valuable for whoever's been watching.
Hi, Nikunj. So there are some questions that I would like to ask.
Sure.
So, firstly, do you feel the most minimum a business should do is to have a Facebook page?
Good question. Do I think that every business needs a Facebook page? No. I don't think every single business needs a Facebook page. But if your business has anything to do with being online or being in the digital world, then you definitely need a Facebook page. Depending on your audience, I would say maybe an Instagram page would be more relevant. But what I mean to say is, for example, if you are uh, I don't know, a grocery store. I keep using grocery stores as an example, but a grocery store, for example, does not need a Facebook page, right? What they need is a Google My Business listing. So I think a better answer to this is that the single most basic thing any brand should have is what is called a Google My Business page. Just Google that and you will find out what it is. It's just, the abbreviation is GMB, right? Google My Business. So not Facebook, but that.
Sure. And one more. Do you think WhatsApp marketing works while you are trying to be a small fish in a small pond?
Yes, it actually works really well. And no, it doesn't work at all. What I mean by that is that it depends on what you're trying to achieve with it and with whom. So, examples where WhatsApp works really well, I think, is where it is not a brand led conversation, but it is a relationship led conversation, right? So, for example, a lot of personal training programs, executive coaching programs, life coaching, therapy, things where the brand is a person, right? Or things like education, schools, right? These kind of businesses are able to use WhatsApp better. But when it becomes like a brand, right? Like as soon as you start sending bulk messages on WhatsApp and you start advertising through WhatsApp messages, people hate that. I mean, just ask yourself as a consumer, right? Have you ever received unsolicited message on WhatsApp and decided to buy something from that business, I would argue that you've never done that, because no one likes doing that, right? Uh, people want to not be intrusive, like not have to deal with intrusive advertising. And if anyone sends me an ad on WhatsApp or on any other platform without me having kind of shown interest in it, I would avoid it entirely. And so WhatsApp marketing is good if you are trying to build a community, and especially if your brand is led by people and it's not about, a brand. But as soon as it becomes a branded thing, it doesn't really do well for you.
Sure, thank you. We'll just wait for a few more seconds if there are any questions, and then we can end the session. I don't think so. There are. Let's end it then. So
Super.
I on behalf of PayU, thank you for joining us today and delivering such an insightful session. Thank you to the audience for being a part of the session, and we will be connecting soon again in the upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you so much.